Would you do the honor
You bet.
of introducing His Honor?
Yes, this is Judge Paul Young, who's with Caddo Juvenile Court. Almost called you John Paul Young, your son, who's a candidate for mayor. Welcome to our studio this morning. You were facing a July 1 deadline for moving 17-year-olds into the juvenile facility. That was the edict, but it didn't come with any cash. Where are we on getting that done now?
Well, first of all, the legislature this year passed a bill, and the governor has signed it, extending that July 1st deadline for nonviolent offenders who are 17, transferring them from the adult system to the juvenile system to March 1st, 2019.
Okay, so you have a little more leeway.
Right. There were a couple of bills in the legislature. One would have delayed that not only to March 1st, but also to a January 1st, 2019 deadline for the Director of Office of Juvenile Justice to certify in writing that he had the funding to handle that transfer, because, of course, the state beds also would be 17-year-olds would be transferred to those state beds also, not just parish based.
The times,
but that requirement was deleted.
When you had been here previously, and just to bring everybody in the audience up to date, when you were here last time, not to take a political position, because that's not what I want you to do right now, but you had, just as the administrator of this, as it were, you pointed out a whole lot of logistical problems with this move, with this mandate. Would you review those for us?
Sure. 17-year-olds are subject to juvenile jurisdiction in 44 of the 50 states. Louisiana is joining that large group with this reform of transferring 17-year-olds to juvenile jurisdiction. Now, 17-year-olds who commit the most major felony offenses, murder, rape, kidnapping, things like that, they would stay in the adult system. But for the vast majority of 17-year-old offenders, they would come to the juvenile system. And that brings us in line with the rest of the country.
Right.
So the reform is legitimate. There's nothing wrong with the reform itself. The problem is that there was no state funding assigned to allow not only the state facilities to accommodate this, but also the parish facilities. Of course, we look at this as a local responsibility.
And you went to the Caddo Commission.
Right.
You didn't get much good news.
No, they saw it as a necessity of passing a tax. They're very hesitant to go before the public with the tax because of recent experience. And so they were just really hoping that this would not be a problem.
This is not going to go away, though.
Well, that's my point. We have over 400 17-year-olds arrested and detained by the parish sheriff currently each year. We've averaged that out to about 40 17-year-old offenders that would be detained by the sheriff now and presumably detained by us. Now, we can do, we think, a better job. We've had to do a better job because we have the smallest detention center in the South.
Right.
Half the size of Little Rock, Jackson, et cetera. So for the past 15 years, we've been having to be smarter, have more alternatives to detention like electronic monitors, comprehensive treatment systems, things like that, that allow us to function on a half the size detention center, but now with the addition of 17-year-olds, that's just physically impossible.
We have a juvenile lockup. Folks like Bossier do not. Is there a way where the sheriff could house the 17-year-olds where they currently exist? How are they handled in other parishes that don't?
Yeah, that detracts from the reform. I mean, the purpose of the reform is to have 17-year-olds treated as juveniles.
What do they do in Bossier? What do they do in parishes?
35-year-old armed robbers.
What do they do in parishes where they don't have a juvenile lockup?
Well, the vast majority have worked out cooperative agreements. Like there's a facility in Caddo that houses juveniles for a region, Bossier included, at Ware, they call it.
Could we send some of ours there?
No, they're full.
Well, pardon me just a second. It sounded to me like a couple of seconds ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded to me like you said, based on what the state says we have to do and the current facility that is way too small, and in fact too small to even be expanded to fit the number of prisoners, 17-year-olds, they're going to send us, that unless they give us the money for a new, huge, state-of-the-art facility, then we don't know what to do.
Well, I know what we'll have to do, and the judges are legally responsible for determining whether someone, once the police bring them to the detention center, which they have the right to do based on their judgment, the judge decides whether that person is kept at the detention center. And currently, both myself and Ree Casey Jones, the other delinquency judge, each day and into the night, we get calls from kids brought to the detention center, and we have to make a decision based on what we're told about the arrest circumstances, the background of the child, other circumstances, the status of the facility itself, whether we have any beds. We have to decide whether to keep them. So we routinely make those decisions 24/7.
Pardon me.
Right.
The question is then, you or someone has to decide is who stays in jail and who gets cut loose.
That's correct. And we do that now, and we've had to do that now because we have the smallest detention center in the South, half the size of what we currently need. But we've gotten along with that. We make, I think, smart decisions. We have the other services available like the electronic monitors and such. But now that you add these, what we estimate to be 15 to 20 17-year-olds coming in the facility at any one time, obviously we can't do more than what we're doing with the 24 beds.
Off the top of your head, the juveniles that are there now, what is the least severe penalty? What is the least severe crime, and what is the most severe crime?
Sure.
Because you said if it's going to be like the big stuff, like murder or crimes of violence, etc., then they're going to be treated as adults. But what is that range of crime that's there now?
The most serious felonies, murder, rape, aggravated kidnapping, for 15 and 16-year-olds currently get transferred to the adult system, sometimes at the DA's discretion, sometimes by law. That remains the same. But we will get violent or 17-year-olds charged with violent offenses. That will be phased in July 1st, 2020. On March 1st, 2019, we get the nonviolent offenders. The most serious offenses, usually armed robbery, aggravated rape, things like that. The more common offenses are burglaries.
Which, I guess my question in the end was going to be, are you concerned, are others concerned that there's going to be some people back on the streets who should not be?
Absolutely. Now, they won't be the 17-year-olds that commit aggravated rape or armed robbery,
or whatever,
but they will be the 13 and 14-year-olds who have committed their second burglary or alleged to have.
Car break-ins,
vehicular burglaries, simple robbery, or strong armed robbery. Those 13, 14, even 15-year-olds that we currently keep, we will have to release. You cannot have more than 24 beds. That's the state licensing limit.
Cost to make the expansion, and what kind of tax proposal are the judges in favor of?
There's already been a study showing that they can expand the 24-bed facility. We have 8 beds in 3 pods for 24. We would double that. We'd expand the current facility to add 3 pods, 8 beds each, for 48 beds. We believe, again, with the full range of services and the electronic monitors and all that, we'll be able to function with that, and that will put us on a par with similar southern cities.
And how much would that cost?
That's a $12 million project.
And what kind of tax would you propose?
No tax is proposed for that. There are capital funds available. Currently, the Caddo Parish Commission agrees on the record that the money is available to do that, to expand that facility. That's not the problem.
What's the
problem? The problem is the annual operating expenses, which our Juvenile Services Director, Clay Walker, has intelligently estimated to be $4 million. Now, obviously, with that kind of expense, there are areas where reasonable people could disagree and limit the funding. I'm hoping that we could do it for closer to $3 million a year extra, but at least $3 to $4 million.
Right.
So proposals floating around among some commissioners that, we just put them out at the Fort Wade facility and transport them back and forth to court. And, by the way, add a completely new set of staff out there.
Right.
With a new cafeteria
and the transportation costs
and all those costs. That just doesn't make any sense to me when the problem is operating expenses. It's much cheaper to expand the current facility and use what we have and simply add the additional staff rather than a whole new facility, in effect, to handle those additional 17-year-olds. Some have decided or thought about the idea there's a group home that might be available in an old nursing home, but it's not secure. It's not licensed. It's not ready. And it would, again, have to train a whole new set of staff, have a cafeteria, have all those startup costs that just don't make sense.
Our last minute, real quick. You're facing state budget cuts now, too, it looks like.
Yes. We have received from the State Bar Association an email that says, so it's indirect information, but that the state Supreme Court that distributes the funding for a lot of the programs in the state, including a lot of ours, would be cut from $180 million to $120 million.
Whoa.
They're not going to cut my salary, so they have to pay certain things.
That's 33%, right?
They would plan to eliminate, is my understanding, the CASA program, which you know how important it is to keep kids out of foster care and into permanent homes. The stats on that are just when CASA is available, it drastically reduces that crisis problem for abused and neglected kids.
Who makes those calls? Who
would make those decisions about what's funny? Well,
about what money we're cutting this, we're not cutting that.
The administrative people at the state Supreme Court. And again, this is indirect; it's not official, but there's certain things you simply can't cut. You have to have a court functioning. You have to have those.
Sure.
So they're estimating that they would not be able to also have CASA program, drug court funding, juvenile drug court funding, which helps keep kids out of those beds that we're talking about with the state. Again, it's a...
So pardon me, when we had State Representative Seabaugh on yesterday, and when he says, nothing's going to close, we've got the money. What do you think about that?
I can't say what I think about that.
He's a judge.
Because I'm a judge. But it doesn't make sense. It is not accurate. From our vantage point, it is just not real.